David was a good man. He loved his wife, Sarah, very much. They had a beautiful little girl named Grace. Grace was a happy child. She had bright, curious eyes and a giggle that could make anyone smile. She loved to play in the small garden behind their house, chasing butterflies and picking colorful flowers for her mother. Sarah, Grace's mother, would often sit with her, teaching her the names of the plants and singing lullabies. Their home was filled with laughter and warmth, a place where love bloomed freely. But one sad day, a dark cloud fell over their happy home. Sarah, Grace's beloved mother, became very sick. Despite all the doctor's efforts and David's constant prayers, Sarah died. It was a day that changed everything for David and little Grace. David was heartbroken. His world felt empty without Sarah. He did not know what to do. His work as a businessman meant he had to travel a lot, often to far-off countries for long periods. He could not take care of little Grace all the time. He worried about her constantly. Who would cook for her? Who would help her with her homework? Who would tuck her into bed at night and tell her stories? The thought of leaving her alone, even for a short time, filled him with dread. He needed a solution, a safe place for his precious daughter. He thought about his family. Who could he trust the most? David had a sister named Carol. Carol lived in a nice house in a different town, a few hours' drive away. She had a husband, John, and their 2 children, Emily and Tom. Emily was a year older than Grace, and Tom was a year younger. David trusted Carol. He remembered how kind she used to be when they were children, always looking out for him. He thought she would be the perfect person to care for Grace. He called her and explained his situation, his voice heavy with sadness. He asked her if she could take care of Grace. Carol listened carefully, and then she smiled through the phone, her voice sounding warm and reassuring. "Of course, brother," she said. "Grace is like my own child. She is my niece. I will train her well. Do not worry. Bring her here. She will be safe and happy with us." David felt a little better after that call. A small ray of hope pierced through his grief. He knew he had to provide for Grace, even from afar. He promised to send money often for Grace's food, clothes, and school. He wanted her to have everything she needed, everything Sarah would have wanted for her. He truly believed his daughter would be in good hands. So, little Grace, with a small bag of her clothes and toys, went to live with Aunt Carol. It was a big change for her. The house was different, the smells were new, and her mother was not there. She missed her father terribly, but he promised to call her often. Aunt Carol seemed kind at first. She gave Grace a small room to sleep in, next to Emily and Tom's room. Emily and Tom were nice to her at first. They played together in the yard, chasing each other around the mango tree, and drawing pictures with chalk on the dusty ground. They shared their toys, and sometimes, Emily would even share her sweets with Grace. Grace felt a little less lonely. She tried to be a good girl, helping Aunt Carol with small chores like setting the table or folding clothes. David called often, almost every week. He always asked about Grace. His first question was always, "How is my little girl? Is she happy? Is she eating well?" Carol always had good news to share. "Grace is fine, brother," she would say with a cheerful voice. "She is happy here. She is doing well in school. She is a very smart girl. She made new friends." She would tell him about Grace's good grades and how she was learning new songs in school. David believed her. He trusted his sister completely. He worked hard abroad, sending money regularly. He sent enough money for Grace's school fees, for new clothes, for good food, and even for extra things like books and toys. He wanted Grace to have a good life, even without her mother. He thought his daughter was safe and loved, growing up happily with her cousins. He did not know what was truly happening behind the kind words and the cheerful reports. He did not know that the truth was slowly twisting into a cruel lie. Years passed, slowly, like the changing seasons. Grace grew older. She was no longer a little girl, she was now a young girl, about 10 years old. The innocent laughter she once shared with Emily and Tom started to fade. Aunt Carol started to change. Her smiles became less frequent, especially when they were directed at Grace. She was not as kind as before. Her voice grew sharper, her eyes colder. She started to favor her own children, Emily and Tom, more and more. It was like a clear line was drawn between them. Emily and Tom got new clothes often. Bright, colorful dresses for Emily, and sturdy, new shirts and trousers for Tom. They would show off their new shoes, their faces beaming with pride. Grace's clothes, however, became old and worn. They were patched in places, sometimes with different colored fabrics that made them stand out. Her shoes had holes, and her dresses were too short or too tight. She noticed the difference every day. She saw how Emily and Tom would get seconds at dinner, while she was told to eat only what was on her plate, no more. Grace felt a knot in her stomach. She felt a growing sadness in her heart. She did not say anything. She was a quiet child, and she did not want to cause trouble. She missed her father very much. She wished he would come home. She remembered his warm hugs, his gentle voice, and the way he would lift her high into the air. She wrote letters to him, but Aunt Carol always read them first. Aunt Carol would tell her what to write, making sure Grace only wrote good things about her life in their home. Grace knew it was wrong, but she was afraid. She did not want to make Aunt Carol angry. She just wanted to be loved and safe. The house that once felt like a new home now felt like a cage, slowly closing in on her. The warmth had turned into a chill, and the laughter was replaced by a quiet dread. She wondered if her father would ever truly know what was happening to her. Soon, things got much, much worse for Grace. It happened one morning, right before school was supposed to start. Grace had her old, worn school bag ready, with her few books inside. Aunt Carol called her. Her voice was flat, without any kindness. "Grace," she said, "you cannot go to school anymore." Grace's heart sank. She loved learning. She loved her teachers and the few friends she had made. The thought of not going to school made her eyes well up with tears. "But, Auntie," she whispered, "I want to learn." Aunt Carol just shook her head. "No. You are old enough to help. We need money. You will hawk goods." Grace's shoulders slumped. She felt a heavy weight settle on her. Instead of school, Aunt Carol made her hawk goods on the street. Every morning, before the sun was fully up, Grace would be given a heavy tray. Sometimes it was sachet water, sometimes small snacks, sometimes fruits. She had to carry these heavy trays on her head, walking under the hot sun all day. Her feet would ache, her neck would hurt, and her head would throb. She had to shout out loud, "Buy your cold water. Buy your fresh fruit." Her voice would become hoarse by the end of the day. Her clothes were no longer just old, they were rags. They were dirty from the dust of the street, and torn in many places. Sometimes, her skin showed through the holes. They were faded and shapeless. People on the street looked at her strangely. They would stare at her ragged clothes and her tired face. Some whispered, "She looks like a mad girl." Grace felt shame. She felt like everyone was judging her. Meanwhile, Emily and Tom still went to school every day. They wore clean, new uniforms. Their white shirts were crisp, and their skirts and trousers were neatly pressed. They looked neat and happy, carrying their new school bags. They would leave in the morning, laughing and chatting, while Grace was already out on the street, sweating under the sun. When they came back, they would talk about their lessons, their games, and their friends. Grace would listen from a distance, her heart aching for the life she used to have, the life her cousins were living. The contrast was stark, a constant reminder of her own misery. She felt like a ghost in her own family, unseen and unheard. Grace was always hungry. It was a constant ache in her stomach, a hollow feeling that never went away. Aunt Carol would give her very little food. At meal times, Emily and Tom would sit at the table, their plates piled high with food. They would eat until they were full, sometimes even leaving food on their plates. Only after they were done, and after Aunt Carol and John had finished eating, would Grace be allowed to approach the table. She only got the leftover food, the cold scraps that no one else wanted. Sometimes, there was almost nothing left. A few grains of rice, a small piece of yam, a tiny bit of stew. Grace would gather these meager portions onto her own small, chipped plate. She would eat the cold scraps quickly, trying to ignore the bitter taste of unfairness in her mouth, feeling her stomach ache even more after the small meal. She felt alone. She felt like no one cared for her. Her father was so far away, and Aunt Carol, who had promised to care for her, treated her worse than a stranger. Every day was the same. She would wake up early, before the sun. She would hawk all day, walking for hours, her voice growing weak. She would come home tired, her body aching, and her stomach empty. Then, she would eat the scraps, if there were any, and sleep on a thin, worn mat on the cold floor in a corner of the living room. She often dreamt of hot, delicious food, of her mother's cooking, and of her father's comforting presence. But when she woke up, the hunger and the harsh reality would return. The days blurred into weeks, and the weeks into months. Grace felt like a forgotten shadow, living a life of endless hardship. She wondered if she would ever escape this cycle of hunger and mistreatment. One very hot afternoon, the sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty street. Grace was hawking sachet water, her voice barely a whisper. Cold water. Get your cold water. Her feet hurt from walking all day. Her throat was dry and scratchy. The heavy tray on her head felt like a ton of bricks. She wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt. She longed for a moment of rest, a cool drink, anything to ease her discomfort. She saw a big, black car stop far down the street. It was a fancy car, much nicer than any car she usually saw in this part of town. People on the street sometimes stopped to stare at such cars. A man got out of the car. He was tall and well-dressed, wearing clean, expensive-looking clothes. He looked around, his eyes scanning the street as if searching for something or someone. Then, his eyes landed on Grace. He just stood there, staring at her. It was not a quick glance, it was a long, steady stare. Grace felt strange. A shiver ran down her spine, even in the heat. She did not know why he was looking at her so intently. She tried to look away, to focus on selling her water, but she felt his eyes on her, like a physical touch. She kept walking, calling out, "Buy your cold water," her voice cracking a little. The man started to walk towards her, slowly at first, then picking up his pace. Grace's heart started to beat faster. She felt a mix of fear and something else, something she could not name. As he came closer, she could see his face more clearly. He had a beard, neatly trimmed, and his hair was gray at the sides. His eyes were deep and serious. There was something about his gaze that felt familiar, yet she could not place it. She had seen so many faces on the street, but this one felt different. He was walking directly towards her, not looking at anyone else. Grace felt a sudden urge to run, but her feet felt heavy, stuck to the ground. She waited, her breath catching in her throat, as the man approached her. The man came closer, his steps steady and purposeful. Grace felt a shiver, a strange mix of fear and a faint, forgotten memory stirring deep inside her. He stopped right in front of her, so close she could see the worry lines around his eyes. He looked at her face very closely, his gaze searching, as if trying to find something lost. His eyes moved over her ragged clothes, her dirty face, and her swollen feet. Then, he spoke her name, softly, almost a whisper, "Grace?" Grace was startled. Her eyes grew wide. How did this stranger know her name? She looked at him, confused, her mind racing. She had never seen him before, or at least, she couldn't remember him. He had a beard now, and his hair was gray at the sides, making him look older than the pictures she vaguely remembered. He seemed so different, yet his voice held a familiar warmth, a resonance that tugged at something deep within her. He saw the confusion in her eyes. A sad smile touched his lips. Then, he said, his voice a little stronger, "It's me, your father, David." Grace's world seemed to stop. Her tray of water almost fell from her hands, but he quickly reached out and steadied it. "Father," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It was a name she had longed to say, a face she had yearned to see for so many years. Tears, hot and fast, started to stream down her face. She couldn't stop them. They were tears of shock, of relief, and of overwhelming sadness. David looked at his daughter. He saw her ragged clothes, the dirt on her skin, the haunted look in her eyes. He saw how thin she was, how tired and broken she looked. He saw the tears on her face, tears that spoke of years of hardship. A deep, hot anger started to burn inside him. It was an anger so fierce, it made his hands clench into fists. How could this be his daughter? How could she be living like this? He had sent so much money. He had trusted his own sister. The sight of Grace, his precious Grace, reduced to this state, filled him with a rage he had never known. He wanted to scream. He wanted to demand answers. But first, he just held her, pulling her into a tight embrace, trying to convey all the love and sorrow he felt in that moment. David hugged Grace tightly. He held her for a long, long time, as if trying to make up for all the years they had been apart, all the pain she had suffered alone. He felt her thin body trembling in his arms. He stroked her unbarbed, dusty hair, a wave of tenderness mixed with fury washing over him. When he finally pulled back, he held her at arm's length, his hands gently on her shoulders, and looked at her face. His eyes searched hers, filled with a mixture of love, sorrow, and a simmering rage. "Grace," he said, his voice shaking, barely a whisper, "what happened? Why are like this? Why are you hawking? Why are you wearing these clothes?" Grace, still crying, her voice choked with sobs, told him everything. She started from the beginning, from when Aunt Carol first began to change. She told him how she was taken out of school, how her books were put away, and how Emily and Tom continued their education while she was forced to work. She told him about hawking, about the heavy trays, the long hours under the scorching sun, and the pain in her feet. How she was only allowed to eat the leftover food, the cold scraps that no one else wanted. She spoke of the loneliness, the feeling of being unwanted and unloved in a house that was supposed to be her home. Every word she spoke was a sharp knife twisting in David's heart. David listened, his face growing darker with each word. His jaw tightened, and his eyes, usually warm and gentle, hardened into cold steel. He remembered the money he sent, faithfully, every single month. Large sums of money, enough to ensure Grace had the best of everything. He remembered the house he bought for Carol and John. It was a big, nice house, with several rooms, a spacious living area, and a large compound. He had bought it for them to live comfortably, to help them, to give them a good life, thinking that in return, they would care for his daughter as their own. He had trusted his own sister, his flesh and blood, with the most precious thing in his life, his child. Now, he saw what she had done to his child. His precious Grace, thin, dressed in rags, hawking on the streets, starved, and heartbroken. His heart was filled with a burning rage, a deep disappointment that cut him to the bone. He felt betrayed, cheated, and utterly disgusted. He knew he had to make things right, and he knew exactly where to start. David hailed a taxi, his arms still around Grace's trembling shoulders. He made sure she was comfortable in the back seat, wrapping his jacket around her thin frame. He gave the driver the address of Carol's house, the house he had bought. The ride was silent, except for Grace's occasional sniffles. David held her hand, squeezing it gently, trying to convey his presence, his promise to protect her now. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, sorrow for Grace, but mostly a cold, hard anger directed at Carol and John. He couldn't believe they had done this. His own sister. When the taxi pulled up to the house, it looked just as he remembered, well-maintained, with a freshly painted gate and a tidy garden. It was a stark contrast to the image of his daughter, looking like a street urchin. He paid the driver and helped Grace out. As they walked towards the front door, Grace clung to his hand, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and apprehension. She had not been back to the house since morning, and she knew she would be in trouble for not selling all her goods. But now, her father was with her. David pushed the gate open and walked straight to the front door. He didn't bother to knock. He simply pushed it open. Carol was in the living room, watching television, her children Emily and Tom playing a game on the floor. John, her husband, was reading a newspaper in an armchair. They all looked up, startled by the sudden entry. Carol's eyes widened when she saw David. A smile started to form on her face, a smile of surprise and perhaps a little guilt. "David. Brother. You are back. What a surprise," she exclaimed, rising from the sofa. Then her eyes fell on Grace, standing beside him, looking disheveled and tear-stained. The smile vanished from Carol's face, replaced by a flicker of annoyance and then alarm. David's voice was low, dangerously calm. "Carol," he began, his eyes fixed on her, "what have you done to my daughter?" Carol stammered, "What? What are you talking about, brother? Grace is fine. She was just out playing." John put down his newspaper, his brow furrowed in confusion. Emily and Tom stopped their game, sensing the tension in the room. David pulled Grace forward gently, so she was clearly visible. "Playing," he repeated, his voice rising slightly. "Does this look like playing to you, Carol? Does a child who looks like this, who is starved and dressed in rags, look like she has been playing?" Carol's face went pale. She looked at Grace, then back at David, trying to find an excuse. But Grace is a difficult child, David. She doesn't listen. She runs away. We try our best, but—" David cut her off. "Don't lie to me, Carol. Don't you dare lie to me." His voice thundered, shaking the very walls of the house. "I just found my daughter hawking on the street, looking like she has been abandoned for years. She told me everything. She told me how you took her out of school. How you made her hawk. How you starved her and gave her only scraps. How you made her wear these rags while your own children wear new clothes." He pointed at Emily and Tom, who now looked terrified. Carol and John stood frozen, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and shame. The comfortable silence of the living room was shattered by David's raw, unfiltered anger. Carol tried to speak, but no words came out. John finally found his voice, a weak, trembling sound. "David, please, calm down. There must be some misunderstanding. Grace is exaggerating. She is a child, she doesn't understand." David turned his furious gaze on John. "Misunderstanding? Exaggerating?" He spat out the words like poison. "Do you think I am blind, John? Do you think I am a fool? Look at her. Look at my daughter. Does this look like exaggeration to you?" He gestured wildly at Grace, who was now clinging to his leg, sobbing quietly. "I sent you money, Carol. Every single month. More than enough money to feed, clothe, and educate Grace. Where is that money, Carol? Where is it? David's voice was loud, echoing through the house. Carol wrung her hands, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. The money. The money was not enough, David. Things are expensive. Grace eats a lot. School fees are high. She mumbled, her voice barely audible. David let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. Not enough? Carol, I sent you enough money to live like kings. And this house. This house you are standing in, this house you call your own, I bought it for you. I bought it so you would have a good place to live, so you would be comfortable, so you would be able to care for Grace properly. I did all of this for you, for my family, because I trusted you. His voice broke slightly at the word trusted, the pain of betrayal evident. John stepped forward, trying to sound reasonable. David, we appreciate the house, truly. But times are hard. We had to make sacrifices. Grace. Grace is strong. She can help. David's eyes narrowed. Sacrifices? What sacrifices did you make, John? While my daughter was out on the streets, hawking in rags, your children were in school, wearing new clothes, eating good food. What sacrifices did you make? Carol finally found some courage, or perhaps it was desperation. We did our best, David. We took her in. We gave her a home. You were not here. You were always away. We had to manage, she cried, tears starting to stream down her face, but they were tears of self-pity, not remorse. Manage? David roared. You managed to turn my daughter into a beggar. You managed to steal her childhood. You managed to betray my trust in the worst possible way. He took a deep breath, trying to control the shaking in his hands. The air in the room was thick with tension, heavy with the weight of years of deceit finally being brought to light. Grace, still holding on to her father, felt a strange mix of fear and relief. The truth was out. The lies were broken. David stood tall, his eyes blazing with a cold fury that silenced Carol and John. He looked around the living room, at the comfortable furniture, the television, the signs of a life lived in ease, all paid for by his hard work and trust. His gaze then fell back on Grace, her small, trembling body, her tear-stained face, her ragged clothes. The contrast was unbearable. I gave you everything, he said, his voice now dangerously quiet, each word a hammer blow. I gave you a home. I gave you money. I gave you my trust. And in return, you took my daughter's childhood. You took her dignity. You took her hope. Carol started to cry harder, loud, dramatic sobs. David, please. Don't say that. We are family. We made mistakes. We can fix this. Please, brother, don't do this. She tried to move towards him, but David raised a hand, stopping her. His face was set, unyielding. John, looking defeated, slumped back into his armchair. Emily and Tom were now openly crying, sensing the impending disaster. There is nothing to fix, Carol, David said, his voice devoid of emotion. What you did cannot be fixed. You broke something that cannot be put back together. You broke my trust. You broke Grace's spirit. He paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. This house, he continued, gesturing around the room, I bought it for you, yes. But it was also meant to be Grace's safe place. A place where she would be loved and cared for. You turned it into a place of suffering for her. He looked directly at Carol and John, his eyes piercing through their pathetic pleas. I have made my decision, he stated, his voice firm and unwavering. You will leave this house. All of you. Tonight. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Carol's sobs stopped abruptly. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, stared at David. Leave? Leave the house? Where will we go, David? This is our home, she shrieked, her voice cracking. John jumped up from his chair. David, you can't do this. We have nowhere else to go. Think about the children, he pleaded, pointing at Emily and Tom. You should have thought about the children when you were starving mine. David retorted, his voice rising again. You should have thought about where Grace would go when you made her hawk on the streets. You should have thought about your own children when you were teaching them that it's okay to treat another human being, their own cousin, like dirt. He was relentless, his anger fueling his resolve. Carol fell to her knees, clutching at David's trousers. Please, David. Have mercy. We beg you. We will change. We will treat Grace better. We will send her back to school. Just don't throw us out. Her voice was desperate, but it sounded hollow, insincere. David looked down at her, his expression cold. It's too late for that, Carol. The damage is done. You had your chance. Many chances, over many years. You chose to abuse my daughter. Now, you will face the consequences of your choices. He gently but firmly pulled Grace closer to him, away from Carol's grasp. Get out of my house. Now. He pointed towards the door, his hand shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the immense effort it took to control his rage. The reality of their situation crashed down on Carol and John. Their comfortable life, built on deceit and cruelty, was crumbling before their very eyes. David watched them, his expression grim. He didn't say another word, simply stood by the door, ensuring they left presence. Now the door behind them, Grace stood beside her father, her small hand still held tightly in his. She watched them leave, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside her. There was relief, a huge, overwhelming wave of relief that Aunt Carol and John were gone. The fear that had lived in her stomach for so long, the fear of their anger, their harsh words, their neglect, slowly began to loosen its grip. But there was also a tremor of uncertainty. Where would she go now? What would happen to her? She had been used to a life of hardship for so long that the idea of a different future felt almost unreal, too good to be true. David turned to her, his face softening as he looked at his daughter. He knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. Grace, he said, his voice gentle, it's just you and me now. This is your home. You are safe here. You will never be hurt again. He wiped a tear from her cheek. Grace looked around the living room, the place where she had eaten scraps, where she had slept on the cold floor. It was still the same room, but now, it felt different. It felt like her own. David called his lawyer. He told him that he wanted to change the ownership of the house. Grace listened, confused. She knew this was the house where Aunt Carol and John used to live, the house her father had bought. But what did change ownership mean? David looked at Grace, his eyes full of love and determination. Grace, he said, his voice soft but firm, this house, the one we are living in now, it is yours. I am putting it in your name. It will be your property. No one can ever take it from you. No one can ever make you leave. Grace's eyes widened. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her house? The house was hers. It was a big, beautiful house, much bigger than anything she had ever imagined owning. It was the house where she had suffered, but now, it was being given to her as a symbol of her new life, her freedom. It was a powerful moment, a symbolic act of her father reclaiming what was rightfully hers and securing her future. The house, which had once been a place of torment, was now legally and truly hers. It was a foundation upon which she could build a new life, free from fear and mistreatment. She felt a surge of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She looked at her father, her heart overflowing with gratitude. He was not just her father. He was her protector, her savior. News travels fast, especially in small communities. Carol and John, with Emily and Tom, had nowhere to go. They had to move in with distant relatives, in a much smaller, less comfortable home. Their comfortable life, built on David's generosity and their own deceit, had crumbled. They faced hardship, something they had so cruelly inflicted on Grace. They struggled to find work, and their children had to attend a less expensive school. The community, hearing whispers of what had happened, looked at them with disapproval. They were no longer respected. Their reputation was ruined. They often thought about the big house they had lost, the money they had misused, and the easy life they had squandered. The consequences of their actions were severe and undeniable. They had learned a bitter lesson, but it came at a very high cost.